This a live picture from St. Louis, where we are expecting a news conference with the family of Michael Brown, his attorney, and a forensic expert hired to conduct an autopsy. We will bring you that news conference right here, live. A grand jury could begin reviewing evidence in the Michael Brown shooting this week to decide if there is enough to indict Officer Darrен Wilson in the case. St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Bob McCulloch says the process will be ongoing rather than waiting until all of the evidence has been collected. In an interview yesterday, McCulloch explained the jury will take care of preliminary things like subpoenas early in the process.
I expect it will go on, probably till the end of September. And we want to do it as expeditiously as possible, but we don't want to do it quickly. We want it to be very thorough.
The Department of Justice has opened a separate civil rights investigation. Yesterday, Attorney General Eric Holder ordered a separate federal autopsy to be conducted on the 18-year-old, bringing the autopsy total to 3 so far. And 40 FBI agents are on the ground in Ferguson gathering information. I want to bring in former federal prosecutor Kendall Cofffi and forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having us, Jose.
Kendall, I want to bring in the issue here of the tug of war that could be happening when you have so many different areas, federal, state, local, being in an investigation.
Well, and it can create risks of different witness responses to different investigators, a lot of issues. You hope they're working as partners rather than competitors with a separate agenda, but a lot of it's up to the feds. Did they come in with respecting the different tasks that each authority has, or did they come in and say, we're the feds, we're in charge here?
How would that change things? Because really, if there are so many investigations, but the federal government kind of supersedes it all, doesn't it?
They have the right to impose their laws, and if they come in just kind of as 800-pound gorilla here, sort of pushing the state and locals around, that's going to create resentment. That's going to add to an already polarizing community.
On the other hand, if you have local officials who have acted, some would say, in a suspect manner, they don't release the information until, a week later. They release this video of Brown that had nothing to do with the eventual incident. It seems as though maybe a federal government superseding all of that may actually help to calm the fears of no justice.
Well, the feds have a very important role here. This is exactly the kind of case where they can come into community and be a positive force. They're not involved with local politics. They don't care what the local police think or who local police might or might not want to protect. They just want to see if a violation of federal law has occurred, and they've got plenty of jurisdiction to examine that.
And Cyril, let's talk about the results of the family's autopsy of Michael Brown, which is the focus of this press conference that we'll be seeing in just moments right here. Let's see a diagram of it, because according to the New York Times, Brown was shot at least 6 times, including twice in the head. It also shows Brown was shot 4 times in the right arm. What does this tell us about possibly how Michael Brown was killed?
First of all, I want to make a comment. While the feds definitely have power and jurisdiction, it's regrettable that there's a third autopsy. There's no reason in the world why the feds should not have sat down with the family's attorney, the local authorities, and worked it out for the Armed Forces Institute pathologist to be there with the private pathologist doing the autopsy. That was done with Robert F. Kennedy when Dr. Noguchi invited in 3 AFIP forensic pathologists, and they're there and they participate. That should all have been worked out with professional collegiality. That is most regrettable and is going to lead to further obfuscation and politicization and confusion about the whole thing. With regard to what we've been told thus far, at least 6 shots. It's interesting to just think of the phrase "at least." And I'm not being critical. The point is that there are entrances and there are possible exits with re-entrances. So the pathologist is not absolutely certain. Number 2, you've got 2 shots in the head of a 6'3" guy. Now, I don't know Officer Wilson's height, but unless he's 6'8", 7 foot, then he was not towering above Michael Brown. That means that Michael Brown would have been bent over or falling. Now, you can say, gee, maybe he was a charging bull and he was going after the police officer who's standing there with a gun. I find that unlikely. More likely, Michael Brown was falling to the ground and the shooting continued, striking him on the top of the head. Another shot hit him around the right eye and moved downward, exited around the jaw, and re-entered above the clavicle, the collarbone. So you have a clear up to downward trajectory of a 6'3" guy. With regard to the 4 shots on the arm, which have been characterized as shots from the front, keep in mind, just look at my arm, look at my arm. When you have the autopsy person in front of you, or the photos, we do what we call an evaluation in the anatomic position, palms up, the body facing you. So this is the way it would be. But when you're running, your arms could well be like this, flapping backward, and so a shot that hits from the rear enters in the arm, and now the body on the table, and the arm comes into this position, supine, and you have the bullet wounds here. So you got to be very careful in characterizing these as shots from the front. So these are my observations at this time. Yeah. The other important one is no stippling, which is, think of a black pen coming down on white paper. Those are the burning carbonaceous pigments from the gunpowder producing those little superficial thermal injuries. And you don't have gunpowder residue. That's the actual soot from the muzzle. That wasn't found. Now, there was an article of clothing. I don't know whether it was a T-shirt. I doubt that it was anything very heavy. And most likely, if the shots had been fired at close range, you'd still get some gunpowder residue going through such a T-shirt onto the skin. The clothing has to be examined. But right now, it would appear that from a handgun, these shots were fired from a distance beyond 18 to 24 inches. You don't get carbonaceous pigment, and you don't get stippling from a handgun beyond 18 to 24 inches. So that is important, too. And then we don't know anything about the car. Has that been tested for gunpowder residue? Wasn't a shot supposed to have been fired while the officer was in the car? So there's still a lot of things to be learned.
And Ken, I'll bring it back to you. What will it take for the DOJ to completely take over this investigation? And the doctor has some extraordinarily fascinating analysis of what so far we're seeing. And we'll get a lot more information on this press conference that you're seeing on your screens. It should be starting in a minute now. But I mean, should the DOJ be taking complete control of this, even after, as the doctor was saying, there seems to be an issue of why didn't they join that second autopsy?
Well, the DOJ isn't going to tell the locals and the state authorities to go away. That's going to take cooperation and an agreement by the state and locals to let the feds take this thing over. If that were to happen, the spoken reason would be the feds have more financial resources, more human resources. Sometimes there's an unspoken reason. This is too hot to handle politically at the local level, and we're not all that mad that the feds are coming in and taking this one off our hands.
What is the process? How long could it be before we get more information? I mean, we're coming up already on days and days and weeks, and still there seems to be no real information. You know, it's coming out drip by drip.
Well, the feds are notoriously tight-lipped. They've actually been much louder than usual about just announcing what they're doing investigatively. State and locals, that's where you tend to get information. So I think we're going to continue to get it in small pieces, but don't be surprised if it mostly comes from the state and local side.
Kendall Coffee, Sarah Weck, thank you so very much for being with us this morning. And just ahead, the family of Michael Brown expected to hold a news conference just minutes from now. You're seeing the podium right there. Back live, we're awaiting that news conference with Michael Brown's family, the family's attorney, and the forensic pathologist hired to conduct what is a second autopsy. A third autopsy conducted by the Justice Department will come next. And I want to bring in Kendall Coffee, former prosecutor. And Kendall, you know, we were just talking in the few minutes ago about the difficulties of carrying out an investigation like this with so many different responsibilities, the local wanting it, the state wanting it, federal government getting involved. Is there anything that we should know about how these three areas are going to be sifted down to make things work more in a more streamlined fashion? It seems like if they have to compete against each other, there's going to be a lot of information that's lost.
Well, it would be very helpful if the authorities would have a joint press conference and tell us exactly how they're cooperating, because they can certainly stumble over each other. For example, if they do different interviews of particularly important witness and the witnesses say something a little bit different in each interview, that doesn't help get to the bottom of the truth, and it adds to complications if a case goes to trial, if witnesses are on record saying different things. What if there are, in effect, competing differences of opinions in the autopsy reports? That's not going to make getting to the truth any easier, both in terms of community opinions, and the job of sorting it out, maybe even at a trial. What happens with a good defense lawyer when he gets a couple different opinions in different autopsy reports? They can absolutely run to the goal line with that. So this needs to be coordinated. There needs to be true partnership, not competitors, and I think they could help the public and all of us understand how they're coordinating their roles.
I have a joint press conference to explain that, for example.
Absolutely. The DOJ has gotten out front and said we're doing an investigation. We don't want to ask them what's inside their investigation, but from a public standpoint, let's understand how you're coordinating it, and so that we don't end up, for example, Jose, with an outcome where the feds say there should be charges, the state says there shouldn't be charges. What if you get different outcomes? What does that do to the community?
What happens if that happens?
Each side has a right to bring their own charges. The feds can't tell the state what to do, the state can't tell the feds what to do. But what does that do to a community that's already torn apart if there seem to be two completely different views of what happened here?
And let's talk about that community. I want to go back to Ferguson and straight to MSNBC.com national reporter Tremaine Lee, who's been following all of the events